we are. I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next, the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am talking with me. But before you think that this might be some kind of weird Dead Ringers adaptation kind of situation, I'm not actually going to be talking to myself. I am talking with someone who, if you know me personally, you may also know Michael Quinn, who I generally know as Mick, or Squarehead, if you prefer. And why, you may wonder. And you may think to yourself, this sounds like the most self-indulgent thing that you could possibly do for your podcast. And in a way, I suppose it is. But as a disclaimer, if it needs to be made, it wasn't originally my idea. So as you may be aware, I have been making my own music. And recently I released an album with Augurio Drama called Real Silence. And as much as I have this kind of perverse hesitation or embarrassment about sharing what I do creatively with my friends, Mick did listen to the album and was very positive about it. And he suggested it would be cool for him to interview me. I think without having any particular idea of what the interview would be for. And once he suggested it, I thought it would be kind of fun to make that interview actually an episode of the podcast. And it sort of ties into the whole purpose of this podcast, to investigate people's experiences with independent music making, something that I'm also doing myself. So for those of you who would be interested, this episode is actually me being the interviewee and talking about my experiences, mostly really with making this album, but a little bit as well to do with the collaborations that I've had and different processes for making music. So hopefully that'll be something of interest. And yeah, I guess there's really not much need for me to waffle on because you're going to get to hear me waffling on in this interview. I'm going to play a track from Real Silence at the end. And I suppose there isn't really anything else that needs to be said other than if you'd like to check out Real Silence, you can go to Drama Recorder on Bandcamp. Just type in Real Silence. You'll find it pretty quickly, but I'll put links into the description. And you can follow me on all social networks at Tom Osman Sounds. You can check out more of what I'm doing musically, what I've got coming up at my website, tomosmansounds.com. And I suppose that there's nothing else for me to say, but me, take it away. Wake up. Take a moment to feel. Before you even open your eyes, feel what's inside your body. Okay. So I don't know, like, it's kind of weird. It's my podcast, but you're interviewing me. Are you gonna intro it?
Well, it was actually, introductions was the first point of the day. I'm Mick. I come to you now in this hour of, I think is it? 2:30. And I'm here to rattle and roll. And you are?
I'm Tom.
So, never heard of you. What do you do?
I shit. What do I do?
Should that be what don't you do?
Dun, 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 dun. I talk shit.
Talk shit for a living?
Yeah,
Aye, well, you've also got a new album out.
it's
And
true.
that's what we're here to talk about. So, what's it called?
Real Silence.
Real Silence. Aye, Tom Osman.
That's correct.
Real Silence. Can't say I've ever heard of you before, but I did listen to your album. And where's it available?
So the place that you can get it from at the moment is Bandcamp, and you can get it from the Drama Recorder website. That's who released it. Eventually, it'll go on Spotify, but for now, Bandcamp.
And what formats?
Well, you can actually also buy it on cassette as well if you go to Bandcamp. So it's either digital downloads or cassette, and you can listen to it for a few times as well on Bandcamp, and then you'll be kindly asked to purchase it. But I think if you want to purchase the digital file, you can basically pay nothing, so pay whatever you want.
Oh, right, aye.
I think it was like, I don't know if anyone did it before them, but I know Radiohead did that with
Yeah.
Rainbows, and like seemed revolutionary at the time. But that's a lot of bands on Bandcamp do that. They'll give you the option of just paying whatever you want.
That's good. I mean, it means that people can decide on their own budget and it puts pressure on them.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It'd be interesting. I don't know if you'd ever be able to really measure it, but it's kind of interesting to think about whether people would pay more if they just have the choice of paying whatever they choose. I mean, I'm sure some people don't, but
Uh,
maybe some people will pay more.
right, well, let's reveal the kingdom of beyond this foolish veil of sensory perception and get on with the questions about stuff and things and all that. Um,
All right.
so how did you come to collaborate with, you need to pronounce it for me, Augurio Drama?
Yeah, that's it. So the way that I came to collaborate with Augurio Drama is through collaborating with existent, non-existent,
Right.
which I did on the previous album that I did with him, which was Industrial State of Mind. And so we made that album together, and then we were looking for somewhere to release it. And so we kind of just tried to find all the independent record labels we could that seemed like they might be remotely interested. And then, as you'd expect, contacted loads of people, got no replies from most of them, had one or two that listened to it and said, nah, it's not really our thing. But then I found this label, Drama Recorder. So Augurio Drama makes music or sounds like harsh noise, ambient, dark electronic music, and he also has this label. I say he, I don't actually know. Like, as with existent, non-existent, Augurio Drama is anonymous, but I think it is a guy. I kind of like, in a bit of a funny way, approached them, and I think I said, because the way that I found existent, non-existent was just on Instagram. And I just messaged them and said, you seem really like you make really interesting stuff. Do you want to collaborate? So they had various instrumental stuff they'd done, and I created a story over the top of one of them and said, this is the kind of thing I could do. What do you think? And they were really into it.
Mhm.
So I contacted Augurio Drama and said, I'd like to collaborate with you. And by the way, here's this album that I made. Maybe you'd be interested in releasing it. So it's kind of like I did the two at once.
Ah,
And
keep
so
up.
they then released Industrial State of Mind, and then we decided to collaborate once that was out.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I see also you've got a long-term relationship with Neil McKeown vis-a-vis the production process. So how did that pan out this time?
Well, as you may remember, we were in a band
Yeah,
with Neil some time
I've never
ago.
heard of you before. What are you talking about?
It's just like it's a mental blindfold. It's like you've had your left and your right hemispheres severed, and you can only see me on one side of your brain. So yeah, I kept on doing stuff with Neil when I was in Oxford and he was in London. And so I knew that he would be able to record, much better than me, mix much better than me, produce, do all of that stuff better than me.
Mhm.
And so yeah, every time I have something to make, I get him involved, and he's always great to collaborate with. He does yeah, everything at a much higher level than I could. Although to be fair, on this latest album, I did actually do some mixing myself. For much of it, we then had to like dismantle all of it and start again.
Ah,
It's,
well.
it's like looking at my mixing, going, "Why did you do that?"
Uh,
But I think there were a couple of things that we kept. But yeah,
that's cool. But then on the sort of technical aspects of that then, obviously it's a spoken word album,
more or less.
more or less.
I mean, I'm not singing,
Yeah,
but I'm kind of shouting at some points.
with amazing music by Augurio Drama
That's right.
in the back. You've told me just prior to this interview that you don't have like any vocal warm-ups or anything like that you do before you record your podcasts.
Yes.
Do you have anything like that you do before your recordings?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, so from that point of view, it is kind of stupid that I don't do that for the podcast. But I had this singing teacher when I lived in Oxford called Alexander Massey,
Okay.
who's this, I can't even remember how I found him, but he's a fantastic, basically classical singer and classical voice coach. And yeah, this was like 14, 15 years ago. And he gave me some really useful instructions for technique, both in terms of how to sing, but also in terms of various different warm-ups.
Yeah.
Lots of kind of relaxation techniques. So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that I still do, but essentially it all comes down to warming up and relaxing the body and the
Yeah. And then
and
takes, do you do multiple takes or do you try to make it more like a live
I,
one take expression?
well, Neil and I had this experience that was very valuable where we were making an album together, which we never finished.
Uh-huh.
And what we like, we spent far too much time trying to mix and fiddle with stuff after recording. So it's
Yeah.
like we'd kind of come up with a song and go, right, let's record it. And then it's like if we'd actually practiced together for longer, we could have had takes that of themselves were really high quality. But a lot of the time, what we ended up having is we'd have takes where we're like, oh, it's not quite good enough. Let's like re-record bits. And it ended up being this patchwork. And then we would try to do all of this like post-production. And I think when you do it that way, a lot of the time, and I guess it depends on the type of music, but when you're playing kind of like rock music, essentially, you kind of lose the soul if it's just
Yeah.
all like, trying to do everything post-production rather than
But
just
then
getting a
the
good
secret that
recording.
most bands don't tell is that they actually do 40 takes and they change their expression throughout each take, and then they find the bits on each take, they maybe sing through the whole song as a live experience, and then they'll go, oh, I like the sound of that piece and then that piece, and then that actually feeds back into their performances later, because once they've actually recorded it, laid it down,
Yeah.
they can then mimic
Yeah.
that in their live performances.
We definitely did that. I mean, I guess maybe for vocals, I'm not sure, but maybe for vocals, that's like not such a big deal, is actually to cut out the parts that you liked. And we definitely still did that on this album. Like
Mm-hmm.
there were bits, but we tried as much as possible to have like one kind of core take. And if it was necessary to sort of, cut a couple of bits in, we'd do that. But as much as possible, I've been trying more and more to have a bit more continuity rather than the sort of cutting and pasting approach that I had
Yeah.
before.
And then effects, obviously, there's a lot of varied vocal effects going on
Mm,
this album as well. Overlaying, integrating overdubs, that sort of thing.
yep.
Do you have like a specific technique that you use for those experiments for the sound? Do you have a sound in your head that you're trying to attempting to create something that you're trying to achieve, or do you just like divine around until you find a seam of gold?
Well, a big limitation that I have is I don't really have the sort of technical vocabulary
Uh-huh.
for this. Like, just for example, there's an album that I'm going to be reviewing for Ghost Cult magazine by this band Veil Burner that I've actually interviewed a bunch of times and I've reviewed them a bunch of times. And they've got this really sort of like distinctive guitar sound, and I keep referring to it as being rubbery. And I'm sure there are like much better technical terms that I could come up with, but I just keep going back to like, that's rubbery. So,
The shoe fits.
so generally, I think when I was doing stuff with Neil, I'd maybe have an idea of like in my head of kind of the sort of thing that I'd like, and then I'd try to express it sort of as coherently as possible, and then he'd try things out, and I'd either go like, oh yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm looking for, or that's not. That tends to be that way.
Hmm. Cool. Right, next bit. I often wonder myself whether my insights into art, especially music, are actually accurate or not. So here's a few quick fire questions about the first couple of tracks. So just feel free to explain or expand on the actual meaning behind each one. But in my analysis, if you want to call it that, track one is your body, and it's like an inverse sleep meditation. Like not so much headspace as head damage. Is that the inspiration behind the track?
Yes.
Yes.
Basically, what I wanted to do is I wanted to make a guided meditation that was disturbing. That was the
Yeah.
idea for it. So I spoke to a friend of mine, Lecky,
Uh-huh.
and so she, as kind of like a side job, does yoga instructing. And so I don't remember if she's actually like done meditation classes, like taught meditation classes. I don't think so, but she has a lot of experience with meditation. So when I was coming up with the idea, I spoke to her about how to sort of make it seem authentic, like a guided meditation. So she was the one that gave me the insight of expression. There's a variety of different expressions that I use on that track, like draw your attention to, and oh, I can't even remember now, but there's like a whole bunch of those phrases that I popped in, and they were all designed to give that impression of it being a meditation. And then obviously, like I read it in a very kind of calming, soothing way as well. So like it's a bit of a Trojan horse. Like it starts off very soothing, and then very quickly you're going, hang on a minute, like this is not
Yeah.
like a soothing topic at all.
It's definitely sending you down paths that you don't want to use for a meditation, that's for sure. Um, that's class. Anyway, track two is called A Number. Now, this question might take a while.
Cool.
Right, so do you ascribe to the empty brain theory of Robert Epstein, if you know who he is?
Not to be confused with Jeffrey Epstein.
No, no, not to be confused at all. He's a psychologist, eminent. Used to be a professor at Harvard. He basically has this theory that memory might not, in fact, be stored within the cells of the brain, and instead they're stored elsewhere. And because there's no measurable place in the brain where memories are encoded and stored, we've never been able to do it in science. So he's got this idea that variously that the brain accesses memory from somewhere as an emergent property, and it's nothing at all like a computer where you're recalling data from a memory bank. And he's even more recent ideas about it. He's even considering the thought that DMT might be involved, and it might have an unknown function that we're as yet to understand, that our memory can be stored in some extra dimensional space, and that rather than locally in your neurons. And so, do you ascribe to that, or is this song just an anecdote about you trying to remember a phone number when you're high?
I never said anything about being high in that song.
Comes across that way.
So hang on a minute. To understand this theory, so when you say that the theory involves memory being somewhere else, do you mean like in objects?
No, in another dimension.
Or another dimension? So like not that the memory could be in the guitar case, but the memory is in like a parallel dimension.
Mm-hmm. And that through people's DMT experiences, we maybe access that other dimension a lot more directly when you overload your brain with DMT, because everyone's carrying, it's the old joke about DMT, because it's naturally produced in all plants, animals. So everyone's carrying an illegal drug around on them at all times. Even plants are. So
is DMT illegal?
Oh yeah, very much so. But people that do DMT experiences all access this because you're flooding your brain with this chemical that we have very little understanding of, that we may be accessing that extra dimensional space much more directly, and that's where our memory is actually stored, is in some extra dimensional space, and that there's some physics at play that your mind can access through an emergent property of the brain, this extra dimension. I know it's crazy to think of, but this is a top psychologist.
I don't really have any resistance against the idea of different dimensions that we tap into. I think the thing that I used to like back in the days when my brain was kind of capable of really like dealing with these kind of deep philosophical questions, because I feel like I can't really that well anymore. But I think one of the things that used to really annoy me is when I was doing a class, a philosophy class that was metaphysics, and they were talking about parallel universes. And at that point, I was just like, no, I can't
switch off to that.
I can't be doing any of that shit. So if you talk about parallel universes, I don't have any interest. If you talk about different dimensions, I can.
So what is this? What is then? So it's more like just an anecdote about trying to remember a number.
Just an anecdote about trying to remember a number. Well, the thing is, like, so there were a few tracks on this album that were written in a very short space of time when I was on holiday in Crete. And I was basically spending almost every day sitting on a lawn chair, not a lawn chair, sitting on a deck chair. What is the thing that you sit on by the pool?
Lounger?
I guess maybe it's a lounger. Sitting on a chair that you sunbathe in, and just getting absolutely roasted, sweating, and just trying to come up with like 4 or 5 stories so that I have enough material for an album. And one of them was this track. So when I think of that track, I think of being by the pool in Crete.
Wow.
But I can't really remember what the point of it was. I think it just came to me and I thought this is sort of peculiar and I liked the sort of, steering people down this little path.
Well, I've got some insight into that I'll get to later. I think, well, it's not insight, but ideas about what I think you're expressing.
Well, do you know what? And I want to say, like, the more, as we're talking about it now, I am remembering there were a couple of things that it came from, which I won't talk about just yet, and I'll let you say what you want to say about it. But what this does make me think of is I did an interview with Steve Austin of Today Is the Day.
Not Stone Cold.
Not Stone Cold Steve Austin, no. But actually, it wasn't my interview with him. I did interview him, but before I did the interview, I was listening to some other interviews that he did, and he did this interview where he was talking about how sometimes he'll write a song and then he won't really know what it is that he's singing about, and then he'll listen to the song after it's been recorded and be like, oh, like that's what was going on at that time. So it's kind of like they sort of reveal themselves, or they can reveal themselves later on. So yeah, I thought that was a really interesting idea. And I think that's I like that thought that if you write something and you're not sort of too obsessive about fashioning it in a particular way, but you just go, I'm gonna express whatever comes out of me, up to a point. Like it's kind of crafted up to a degree.
Yeah, automatic writing, stream of consciousness stuff, that's the way I personally write as well.
Yeah.
I discover what I've written later.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah.
Kind of finding out what you actually meant later down the line.
But at this point where I don't want to be talking about the track by track and being too granular.
Yeah.
Because I want listeners to be as surprised and interested and fascinated by each track as they go through. I don't think it's the best way to do any analysis an album. I think overarching themes is where I would like to go next.
Yep.
But before I do that, are there any other tracks that you'd actually like to expand on individually that stick out in your mind that you're most proud of or anything like that? You can say no.
I think the different songs have all got some sort of meaning for me in different ways. So one of the things that I like, I suppose just in general, not even necessarily about stuff that I've done, but I think I sort of observed from about the point when I was 13 or 14 years old that particular music, because I do have a tendency to get obsessed with music and just, like you remember when I got really obsessed with Typo Negative and you got so pissed off because I was always listening to Typo Negative and you're like, this is fucking shit.
I'm not a fan. They have... No, they don't. I'm not a fan.
So anyway, like I have a tendency to get obsessed with music. And so then what tends to happen as a byproduct is when I then go back to that music later, I tend to sort of associate it with particular times and particular places.
Okay.
So for me, these albums that I've done in the past 3 years, they all have particular locations to them. So this album was written while I was living in Berlin. Some of it, like I say, was written during a holiday in Crete, but it's like basically it encapsulates that year that I had.
It's weird that some of it for you is sunshine.
Yeah, well, I'm glad.
Wait until people listen and see if they can pull out the sunshine. I guess mostly that comes from the musicality of it rather than the actual stories that you're telling.
Well, that's like
there's not much sunshine in that music.
No, but that's also another thing that does need to be said is that even though Neil and I went in and we did treat the backing tracks quite a lot, and this is actually also something that I should say as I digress from a digression. But one of the things that's particularly different about this album to the last one is with the last one, I created stories, recorded them, sent them to existent, non-existent, and he entirely created all of the sounds around it, all himself. Whereas this time what I did is Augurio Drama gave me just like a folder's worth of about 40 different tracks that he'd done. and I picked out the ones that I wanted to do the vocals on top of, and
Ah,
I
ah,
created my vocals to go with the sounds. So
that's a whole different synthesis.
yeah, it's a very different thing. And so, there are these tracks which are very kind of ambient and very sort of trying to be soothing but disturbing at the same time in this way that I like to do. But then there are other tracks on the album where the music is very abrasive, or it's like almost kind of like techno with the beats. And I chose those tracks specifically because I wanted to be able to try doing something that was quite different for me. So I think the backing, like underlying instrumental tracks, probably had quite a big impact in terms of the overall impression that the tracks have, and also what I wrote as well, I guess. So even while I was lying in the sun in Crete, I was listening to like
So yeah, the sun just became yet another powerful, overbearing
yeah.
item within the writing process, rather than sunshine, lollipops, rainbows.
No, exactly. And like it was there's a track on the album which is me sort of imagining getting lost out in the wilderness. And so like that was another one that I wrote while I was lying in the sun. So yeah, very much to your point, it wasn't necessarily like, oh, it's just like a nice sunny day. Like it was too hot and I was trying to endure it. So maybe that aspect kind of got into the writing a bit too.
Right, cool. So the next bit is overarching themes of the album. Now this is the meaty part, so I'll better take another deep breath before I ask you this big question.
All right.
Right, for me, the overarching themes of the album seem to be about
Oh, I'm interested to know what
uh,
your conclusions are.
feelings of being out of control, feelings about having fears, about not being able to control your experiences, survive situations of difficulty, about being weak or lost or drowning, about pretending to be okay when you're not okay, about being frightened of being alone, fear of others, fear of yourself, about uncertainty, about lack of resourcefulness, about being lost, about being rudderless, contemplating loneliness. Is that an accurate description in your mind?
Well, of me.
No, well, not of you, but like of the content of the album. I mean, it could be about you. I mean, I guess all albums are about the person that write them.
I
Is that
think
what you're trying to reveal?
I think there is always an element of, without wanting to sound pretentious, existential uncertainty about me in terms of everything that I do creatively. So I'm always sort of wondering about my existence and feeling, yeah, insecure in the sense that I don't really have kind of, I don't have firm religious beliefs. I don't have firm ideas of what I think happens when we die. I don't even have firm beliefs about, our permanence or the reality around us. I find everything in terms of my experience quite slippery.
Hmm.
So I think that's something that I'm always kind of grappling with, and it comes out a lot in stuff that I create, is kind of like what is going on and how reliable is reality.
Yeah, and I guess what you said there about not having any strong opinions about what happens after you pass.
Mm.
You've dedicated the album to your late father as well.
Yeah.
That's obviously an important thing to you, and it's important. Like all jokes aside about me not knowing who you are,
Yeah.
obviously we've known each other for many, 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 many years, and I knew your dad as well.
Yeah.
So are the core feelings of the album something that also drove you to dedicate it to him? About your uncertainty about like afterlife and things like that.
That's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought about that before. So I guess not in terms of the afterlife, not consciously, but definitely there are parts of the album which refer kind of obliquely to my dad because he was sick during the time that I was writing these songs, these tracks, whatever they are,
Stories.
these stories, yeah. So there is at least one track. Yeah, I'm just hesitating because I'm thinking, to your point about allowing people to experience it for themselves. I guess I won't say which one, but it could be quite obvious for people when they listen to the album. But there is one track that is actually me specifically ruminating about my dad while he was ill.
And so obviously, like expressing those sort of emotions and things like that in an
Mm.
album and revealing them to the world at large.
Yeah.
It's in a musical art form
Mm.
of spoken words and stories. Has that allowed you some space to explore those feelings? Are you looking to find ways to work past some of the feelings that you're expressing, or do you actually just take comfort from acknowledging your fears and do you revel in them?
So I think during that year, last year in Berlin, for kind of different reasons, I was going through a process of sort of addressing my feelings and my emotions and some of my kind of impulses
Hmm.
to a degree that I hadn't done before. And some of that was quite difficult. But yeah, that was all kind of going on as well while I was writing the album. So I don't know if necessarily, I mean, I suppose there's an element of the writing being kind of a cathartic process, but I think that was kind of going on to various degrees outside of this album and its creation in particular.
Well, that's enough of the deep shit. I hope it's not been too intrusive or intense to discuss such things, but it just kind of seems to me to be important to give you a platform to air those sort of themes and talk about the album in a conversation. But we'll move on to what's next in your head. Have you got any plans for what's coming up? Any new ideas for albums already in the mill?
So part of the reason why I ended up pursuing this sort of spoken word style of doing things was that I was getting fed up with the way that I make and perform songs. I felt like my vocal style, like it goes back a little bit to having the lessons with Mr. Massey. Like he showed me how to have some really valuable technique, but like to take an example that I sort of use as a reference point, which is like so far away from where I'm at in terms of being a vocalist at the moment. But I look to like Eugene from Oxbow and
Hmm.
Bunwell, and the way that he
Yeah,
can be
Oxford had
so
a big
kind of
influence on you, aren't
he can be so animalistic in and so it seems to me like quite free in the way that he expresses himself. And I think that unfortunately is one of the kind of this is one of the things that I'm really trying to improve on is the way that I am so contained in terms of my emotions. And I made some progress with that while I was in Berlin. And yeah, like just to quickly again reference one of the tracks on the album, the track Nothing. If people go to my website, tomosmansounds.com,
they?
they can look at all of the lyrics there, but you'll see that there are no lyrics for Nothing. And part of the reason why there are no lyrics for Nothing is because Nothing was basically improvised. I improvised it in the bathroom, tap half, staring at myself in the
That's
mirror,
it.
like slapping myself while I was doing it to try and like get myself into the kind of mental state that I was going for.
Psyching yourself up.
Psyching myself up, yeah. And that was quite an intense track to do. But that was kind of one of those examples where I really wanted to sort of like break out from what I feel as sort of the confines that I've created for myself as a performer. So yeah, part of my thing with doing the spoken word stuff is I thought this is a way to just sort of get me off what seems like just kind of very predictable way of doing things. Like I've got a very, for me personally, like a kind of a predictable way of singing. I've got a predictable way of writing, and I wanted to do something totally different so I could then come back to songwriting, hopefully from a different,
Mm.
more like open,
A new
expressive point of
avenue.
view. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do want to go back to writing songs. I've actually got two songs. I know the next album. I've already got the album title done. I've actually got a whole track list and like framework of what style I want each track to be I've got 2 of the songs already done.
So you've got a cloud of ideas and you're waiting for the rain to fall?
You could say that, yes. You've got that on a card on your fridge.
Got it written down here.
So it's probably going to be another collaboration with Existent, Non-Existent, because he's up for collaborating again. And I'll probably have Neil involved. And you could also potentially be on it because we did that. Remember, I wrote that track,
Yeah.
and you incidentally on your phone recorded this little thing, which I think came out really, really cool. I actually think
weirdly cool.
so. That could potentially have a place
If I do say
in
so
there as
myself.
well. You know, sometimes really cool things come out very spontaneously. In fact, I mean, I didn't put it here just particularly as kind of like, look at how cool I am, like the things I have. But this is Everything Keeps Dissolving by Nick Solsby, a book of interviews with Coil over the course of their career. And there's just a particular bit I thought of there that John Balance from the band was talking about how they'd have tracks and they'd often reimagine them. You know, they'd put them out in different forms. And there was one of their albums where they had certain tracks that were kind of like unfinished to a degree, but he just decided that it would be cool to have them. Like, you know, you don't have to necessarily have everything all produced and recorded and figured out to the same degree. Sometimes things can be more spontaneous. They can be kind of rougher or whatever else. So, you know, maybe that could be the case with that track. Sometimes if you get something that sort of has a little bit of magic to it, and then you go, oh, but we can just refine this. You know, you don't necessarily manage to keep what made it interesting in the first place. So I don't know, but yeah. To answer your question in that long-winded way, maybe you'll be on the next album.
We'll see. Depends how much you're paying. We've already been through this. We've already been through this 10%.
We've been through this 10% conversation. You know what you have to do.
We've all got places to be and things to do. And so before we go, it's plug time again. Just remind the listeners where they can get your album.
So they can go to Bandcamp. They can go to the Drama Recorder page on Bandcamp, and they will find Real Silence there. If you go onto Bandcamp and you type in Real Silence, you'll get some other album that has nothing to do with me, but you'll find it very quickly. You can also check me out. As I mentioned, my website before, tomosmansounds.com. There's links to the album there. You can also stalk me on Instagram at Tom Osman Sounds, and I have links to the album there too.
Cool. Well,
what would you like to plug, Mick?
I'll have an internet plug.
How's your book going?
Slowly but surely. Slowly but surely. I'm actually writing a second book at the same time. It's a bad idea.
You don't want to plug the Celts?
Hey.
As the spokesperson for Glasgow Celtic Football Club.
The most famous team in Glasgow. Let's move on because, like I say, we've got places to be.
Yeah.
So, my fellow twat-faced arseholes, that's that. Bye-bye. Cheerio.
Wake up. Take a moment to feel. Before you even open your eyes, feel what's inside your body. Rest your awareness on the pain, the tension, the stress. Notice if you're holding your breath. Now, open your eyes. Make your way to the mirror. Look at yourself. Notice if something's different. You're seeing something. Something that wasn't there before. Something underneath your eyes. Observe how it makes you see yourself. Touch it. Draw your attention to how it feels. If you notice that it wasn't here yesterday, that's okay. It's here now. Notice if your skin looks different. It may just be the light, or not. It may be nothing. And in any case, your life, as it is already too full. Too many things to remember. Too many things to take care of. Too many responsibilities. Too many obligations. Too many commitments. Understand that in the end, it's your body that gets you. One way or another. Draw your attention to a feeling of anticipation. That's your body waiting. Waiting for a moment. A moment when you aren't looking. Then it comes. To silently put its hands over your mouth. You can try to get away. Waiting until it isn't looking. Waiting until it isn't expecting you to sneak away. Better to keep your plans a secret. Take your time. Be natural. Early one morning, crawl out of bed. Feel the floor underneath you. Crawl down the hall on your belly. Observe the door in front of you. Reach up. Now slowly open the door. Rest your awareness on the change in temperature. Crawl onto the landing. Down the stairs. Onto the street. Crawl to the gutter. Open the drain. Crawl inside. Now, keep crawling. Crawl all the way back home.